Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Samantha Motter, the marketing analyst for Aurora. We are joined today by the Accellion team today to discuss their enterprise content firewall. A few housekeeping notes. Please silence your cell phone. You'll be on mute. And if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. Our speaker today is Charles Canavan, the sales engineer at Accellion. He will be discussing Accellion's enterprise content firewall. Charles, I'll go ahead and hand over the mic to you.
Alrighty, thank you for that. Thanks for having us. As she said, my name is Charles Canavan. I'm a senior sales engineer for Accellion, based on the West Coast here in the Bay Area of California, very close to our corporate headquarters in Palo Alto, California. Accellion as a company has been around for about 20 years. We made our bones initially in the large file transfer market back in the day where you had to maybe overnight a drive on a plane for a couple $1,000s or more to get information from one place to the next. And I would say in the last 4 to 5 years, we've made a very large pivot to being a cybersecurity company with our product called Kiteworks, which is classified as an enterprise content firewall. And before I get started on that, I'd like to thank Aurora for having us here today and putting this on. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak to everybody on the line today. And Accellion as a company is really excited about the partnership that we're building with Aurora, and we're looking forward to great things down the road. So with that said, let's jump right into it. So when we talk about, I'll get to what exactly a content firewall is in a little bit here, but what the content firewall actually solves for is what we call the third-party trust dilemma. And the definition we have there on the screen breaks that down. But if I could break it down a little more or distill it, excuse me, a little bit more, I would say that it really comes down to you have people inside your organization that need to share content with the outside world. And when that content is sensitive in nature, IP data, the crown jewels, if you will, PII, PHI, or CUI data, they need to be able to share that information in a safe and secure manner. Because when they're actually sharing that information with the outside world, they're sharing that with potential, the third parties that they could be sharing it with are, maybe potential customers or actual customers, other vendors, suppliers, maybe a governmental agency, a foreign nation, any of those types of places or organizations that you need to share data with. Also potentially brings up a situation where you're sharing it to an untrusted device, an untrusted network, an application, or maybe even an untrusted identity, right? And when we talk to in my travels as an engineer for Accellion, when I talk to security professionals, from the CISO all the way down, this is what keeps them up at night, right? This is what their fear is that any one of these types of transactions opens them up to potential breach. And for those of us in the security world, we know that it's not a question of, if we're going to be breached, it's a question of when we're going to be breached. So we think that putting something in place like a content firewall gives our potential clients and our actual clients the ability to harden their secure channels for when they're actually transmitting this information to the outside world, and we help mitigate and minimize that third-party risk into these types of scenarios that I just described for you. So what we're looking at here is, an idea of what the actual enterprise or network looks like at this point in time, right? So on the inside circle there, you have all the types of content repositories where you have data that might be living, and enterprise apps that allow that information to be stored and then shared with the outside world. So, inside that circle, you have what we would classify as your internal firewall, and the outside circle there is the potential third parties that you're trying to share that information with. So a traditional firewall works in practice by isolating important information and important applications from being accessed by the outside world. And in practice, that's great. But the problem with isolation is that isolation also brings about friction. Friction as far as access is concerned, as far as implementation for governance and compliance. Trying to enact all of those things that I just described from a network or firewall perspective can be tedious and hard to do all at once and keep that information in those security parameters. So the challenge on the screen here is that you have these repositories in the center of that screen that need to that share that content, or excuse me, that have that content stored and need to share it with the outside world. And when we talk to CISOs and security professionals all over the world, what they start to deal with is something that looks like this, right? You start losing visibility, you start losing track, you start losing knowledge about where that information is going across your enterprise, and where it's actually being accessed from and by who it's being accessed. So when I look at this, I say to prospective clients, I say, how well is this actually governed, this type of scenario that we're seeing here? Do we know what's going out? Do we know what's actually coming back in? Because not only is this sometimes it's a one-time transfer out, it's a continuous collaboration from the inside to the outside, right? So do you actually know what's coming back into your own internal systems, your own network? Is this an actual safe deployment? Is this a safe environment? Is this a safe network? So when you start losing sight of what's going on here, imagine a scenario where you have a specific employee or a contractor, and you have maybe 7, 8, 9, 10, 15, 20 different ways to move content to the outside world. That could be SFTP, web forms, email, Box, Dropbox, OneDrive, SharePoint, the list goes on. If something were to happen with that perspective, or with that actual, employee or contractor, imagine trying to track down the history of what that user did across any number of those systems, right? You're trying to find that needle in the haystack. You're trying to find out who they worked with, where that content that they shared went, how it was accessed. And these systems are often in different locations. So not only are they isolated internally, they're probably maybe isolated on different subnets or in different data centers. So you're having to pull, logs or information from different types of tools and repositories to try to piece together this picture of what actually happened for a specific user to find that needle, in that haystack. And if there's people on the call that probably have teams of people that are putting this information together from a forensic perspective and from an auditing perspective, to try to piece together what happened with that malicious bad actor. So what if you had a way to share content across multiple secure channels, consolidate and get visibility into the content that was shared? What if you had something like the content firewall? So we define the content firewall as an enterprise network security platform that will privatize and control incoming and outgoing content traffic based on your predetermined security rules. And if you think about that, you're probably thinking to yourself, that sounds a lot like a network firewall or maybe like a web application firewall. And you'd be absolutely right to think that, because we have modeled our product on the same sort of premises of those systems as they were created, right? And a network firewall was created because it became too much work to isolate, harden, and patch 1,000 different systems on your entire network. So that a perimeter was created, and it was called the network firewall. And then when you look at something like a web application firewall, it became too much work to isolate, harden, and patch hundreds, if not thousands, of apps that are being utilized across an entire enterprise. Therefore, a web application firewall was created. So we say, how many secure channels do you have across your entire enterprise that you need to share content with? Why would you not treat that content in the same manner? Why would you not look at something like a content firewall or create something like a content firewall to secure those channels, to encrypt those channels, to give you visibility and compliance and governance across all those channels as you move that content out of your organization and back in? So on this slide here that we're looking at, Accellion is what we call the control tower there in the middle, right? The ability to look into all these secure channels, to give visibility into content as it's being shared from those actual sources you see in the middle to the outside world and back in if the use case requires for that. So things like email, file sharing, web forms, being able to automate or create through APIs and the REST API suite that we have available. Things like SFTP and MFT for the movement or scripting and automation of the movement of those files. Being able to integrate with enterprise apps like SAP and Oracle and things of that nature. Allowing for meaningful long-term collaboration either through folders or continuous contact through the email that I described earlier. And then last but not least, everything on this page here that I've described also in the palm of your hand or on a tablet of your choice from a mobile perspective, being able to take Kiteworks or the content firewall on the go with you wherever you need to go. And part of that is, the content firewall provides out-of-the-box compliance with frictionless adoption for end users and security professionals alike. And what that means is that not only is it something that provides you that compliance, like I said, out of the box from the HIPAA and GDPR perspective, NIST 800 protocols that we have built into the framework of the appliance, but the end user adoption piece is incredibly important, right? For us, security is 1A and ease of use is 1B right below it, because if no one's using it, what's the point? You know what I mean? No one wants to be shelfware, least of all myself, from a sales and a business perspective, right? I would like to have a continuous and long-standing relationship with all of my clients. So If no one is using it, you're not getting your investment out of it, and obviously I'm not going to get a second chance or a second bite of the apple, so to speak. So that's what we provide, and that's how we define, and that's the capabilities that we see from a content firewall perspective. So from there, how about problems that we solve? What can the content firewall actually solve for, other, breaking down from the third-party trust dilemma? If we bucket those issues, or we bucket those items that we're discussing, we look at them in three major buckets, security being number one. And out of this, the things that I'm seeing the most these days are probably incident response and disaster recovery. Well, obviously we solve for the other things here, but I don't want to bore everyone too much. We're already on a webinar close to Friday, so I'll keep it short as I can here. But from an incident response perspective, how about finding out about something as it's actually happening in real time, instead of maybe finding out about it on the front page of, like, the Wall Street Journal or something like that. The anomaly reporting and the behavior analytics that are produced by our system with the machine learning and AI components that we have installed, again, out of the box compliance. These things come with the service as you pay for it. Being able to find out, hey, John Smith in IT maybe sends 5 files a day or a month. Suddenly he just sent 1,000 files to his Gmail account out of nowhere. This is not typical of his behavior. This is not a normal transaction for him. That type of transaction would be flagged. It would be produced as an anomaly, and then your security professional, whoever is overseeing the product and managing the product internally, would be notified of that type of transaction and that type of issue. So instead of, like I said, finding out about it after the fact, a week later as you're pouring through the logs, or the next day after he's left and gone to a competitor, you find out about that transaction as it's happening. You're able to stop that transaction, lock that account, and prevent that data from being shared, and effectively saving the day. And the next piece of that, like I said earlier, was disaster recovery. More and more of the clients that I speak to are looking for something akin to the content firewall, but they need that to be disaster ready or highly available for if and when something is going to go wrong. Again, going back to what I said earlier about being breached, outages are a part of our daily lives. It's not something we hope for, but it's something we need to be prepared for at all times. And the content firewall and Kyrex as a platform is able to be deployed in that manner. It has the agility to be deployed in a disaster recovery scenario, and also be highly available, spreading that deployment across maybe multiple zones from a cloud perspective, or multiple data centers in an on-premise, or even across the cloud and on-premise at the same time, to give you that real flexibility as far as a disaster recovery scenario is concerned. The next one here, compliance, is also really important as well, right? The things that we have to do to make sure that data is being stored and sent in the right manner and through the right channels. And then we have the auditability and the visibility into those transactions to then at the end of the day prove that we are doing the right thing by having the right tools in place, such as something like a content firewall. So, again, out of the box compliance from a HIPAA and GDPR perspective, our system is actually HIPAA compliant because we can prove that a piece of content was delivered to an end user, that it was accessed, that it was downloaded. So you can show, much like first class or snail mail that makes that HIPAA compliant, you can prove that a piece of content, a piece of data was delivered to the end user, and you can show that and produce it as a report. And then on the other side of that coin, from a GDPR perspective, you can show down to the IP address level within the content firewall that a piece of content is stored in a specific location and only accessed by people within that specific nation. I hear a lot about customers that have to build out environments within Germany specifically, using them as an example here because their GDPR, they were kind of at the forefront of that, right? They were incredibly stringent about how their citizens, their data was stored and how that data was accessed, and then actually deleted at the end of the day as well to kind of comply with the requests. Our, again, solution with the out-of-the-box compliance that it provides can prove that information lives in a specific container down to the IP address level so that you show you are compliant in that respect. And then I think the other big one here from a compliance perspective is FedRAMP. A lot of people look at something like FedRAMP and they might not understand the hoops that they have to go to even consider starting going down that FedRAMP road or through that FedRAMP process. We as a company, we've done all the work for you in that perspective. We've gone through the blood, sweat, and the tears, if you will, to be FedRAMP moderate approved. We have that gold star. If you go onto the FedRAMP application page there. You can see all the vendors that have gone through the same process that we've gone through. It's pretty rarefied air. I think there's less than 150 or less than 200 actual vendors that have the same functionality, the same capability that we have from a FedRAMP perspective. And we're always looking to, go to the next level with that. FedRAMP High is something that we're currently investigating from an internal perspective as well. And we're really looking forward to taking on that challenge because, while it was a significant investment for us to make as a company, we feel that it's really important to be able to present that type of environment to our prospective clients to show that we are very serious when it comes to that type of security and that kind of implementation. So being that it's an AWS deployment, from a FedRAMP perspective, we set up the controls and the monitoring around that actual environment, but it's still yours, right? At the end of the day, it's a private deployment that is entirely yours, no matter where it's actually deployed, including in the FedRAMP perspective. And I think on the last little note that I would add there is that I'm even seeing clients that aren't even in the government space looking to introduce something like FedRAMP into their environment because of the amount of security and controls that system requires to even be accessed and be put into place. I'm seeing a lot of financial institutions, a lot of healthcare organizations coming to us about FedRAMP because they know that at the end of the day, they have that peace of mind of knowing that they have an environment in those kinds of, with those types of security controls in place. They don't have to worry about it, right? They don't have to sweat that. They don't have to worry about building it, maintaining it, upgrading it. All that is done by us. And we've gone through, like I said, the blood, sweat, and tears to get to that point. And then last but not least, IT infrastructure, something that it feels like these days is maybe getting thrown to the wayside, not exactly the most, exciting topic to go on or to talk about, but nonetheless incredibly important because, the IT infrastructure piece is really about, how we can kind of give you the bedrock and the foundation for these types of scenarios that I've been describing to you up to this point. So on this section here, I look at maybe insulating system of records. The whole, meat of the matter, if you will, the whole, purpose of the content firewall is to help give access to content systems that live, or systems of record that live within your internal environments. So things like CIF shares, anywhere drives, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business. These types of repositories end up stacking all kinds of information that becomes incredibly important to you as an organization, and you need to share that information with the outside world, as I said earlier. Kiteworks actually sits, the content firewall and Kiteworks sit in front of those systems and allow for you to control the environment where that information is accessed. It's a transitive type of transaction, right? It only lives for a certain amount of time within the system, and you determine how long that information is accessible for within Kiteworks, whereas the system of record is still maintained behind the internal firewall. It's still safe and protected and secure. And instead of maybe bringing the outside world or bringing the internet to your front door, bring them to Kiteworks instead. And then I think a good transition here is obviously the work remotely, which is kind of the whole basis of this webinar here today is, we offer the ability, or we give the ability through the content firewall, again, that out-of-the-box compliance with that end user adoption, frictionless end user adoption, the ability to access those content repositories when they're not even on site anymore, right? They're working from home, they're working remotely, and all of that again is done through the content firewall. And I think it's also important to kind of touch a little bit more on the types of deployments that we have here, right? So obviously I focus on FedRAMP a little bit on the last slide, but these are the types of environments that we're able to provide for you as a prospective customer, or even a customer if you're on the line already. The ability to provide a host solution by us within our Accellion infrastructure, either AWS or Azure, or by a preferred partner that is also able to host that type of information as well. FedRAMP, again, I touched on a really important and critical piece of infrastructure that we have gone through the rigors to be able to offer to our customers, again, hosted by us in our AWS infrastructure to meet those guidelines and constraints put forth by the federal government to allow for that type of cloud environment to be utilized for CUI data transmissions and other super secretive information as it's being moved in and out of organizations. On-premise is something that I still see a fair amount of, even with the kind of cloud-focused or cloud-forward piece of the security world that we're in now. I think everybody knows or feels that pull to the cloud, and a lot of people are ramping that up more and more. But still, there are verticals and industries out there that really prefer to have things on-premise. I can think of specifically from a legal perspective, They really care about keeping things in-house, under control, in their own manner. And then last but not least, being able to deploy from a hybrid perspective. Like I said earlier, having a true HADR scenario where you have something on-premise, but also in the cloud, where you have that full spread across multiple environments to really kind of keep you safe from those quote-unquote act of God scenarios that kind of throw us all into a lurch. You know, at the end of the day, you know, as a a normal person, it might not really concern me that, you know, a tornado took out a data center, but you know, from a security perspective, being able to provide that same continuity if a tornado does take out an entire data center, that you have other nodes and other servers in different locations where you can have that uptime and maximize it as much as possible is incredibly important. And then the last slide here before I transition into the more, like I said, meat of the webinar here today as far as working from home is concerned is, you know, the Cloud Smart initiative being put forth by the federal government. This is something that feels like it was kind of neglected, honestly, in the last couple of years. I think an update wasn't actually produced until this year, and that had been 7 years or so until that had been done. And this is part of a really big push, and FedRAMP is a piece of that, to get more governmental agencies comfortable and feel better about going to the cloud, being able to provide security from a FedRAMP perspective as far as that vendor being authorized, securing the actual data transfers that I talked about in depth in the previous slides, as it's being moved from the content firewall to other you know, outside vendors or other you know, prospective customers or whoever that may be. The continuous monitoring that comes with being FedRAMP authorized and being part and parcel of being within that FedRAMP you know, cloud, if you will. That those are all things that have to be considered and be done on a day-to-day basis to make sure that you meet those stringent requirements at all times. And then last but not least, providing that centralized governance, right? Out-of-the-box compliance and governance built into the core framework of our product allows for you to feel safe and know that you are meeting that security piece of this puzzle. Those other two sides are grayed out because that's not something that we can really solve for. Those are initiatives that you have to take on your own as a potential Cloud Smart initiative buyer, if you will. But the security piece, we got you covered on that respect, and we welcome any kind of conversation about keeping things going from that perspective. Okay, so I'm going to go over 3 requirements for protecting sensitive content from a working remotely perspective. This slide here is kind of transitioning us from the discussion around the content firewall, what it is and what it can do, into actual scenarios where it actually proves value from a working from home perspective. I'm going to go through a couple scenarios here, and then once I'm done with that, I'm actually going to jump into the product for a short time and show you what our actual CISO dashboard can do from a security analytics perspective. And then from there, we'll go ahead and take some questions and answers from the QA as Samantha mentioned. So again, transitioning from what the content firewall is, what it can do, and now the actual real world application into what it can, what it does in the next 3 scenarios. Okay, so I think the biggest thing we need to kind of think about here, you know, as we're considering or allowing our end users to work from home in these COVID times, more and more, I think Accellion ourselves, we probably won't be in the office until, you know, sometime of spring next year. And I've seen other companies that won't go back until maybe July or August of next year, you know, almost a year away. And what that comes with from working from home is that by its very nature, we're all on a hostile network. You know, I'm sitting here giving you a webinar on security. I'm in a hostile network. My home network cannot be trusted, and anybody else in the call is in the same boat as I am. So this is an incredibly difficult challenge to deal with where, you know, previously you were going from, okay, at the end of the day, at least I know my people are safe. My people are on the inside. I put the right things in place for them to work efficiently and safely from within the confines of our enterprise. But now your enterprise is scattered across the globe or across the country or across the state or city, wherever you're located. And that comes with being at home, and that comes with, like I said, being on your own hostile network. So, you know, things to think about inside your own home network, things like, you know, if you have security cameras on premise, if you have a smart TV, digital assistant, I got an Alexa sitting out in my kitchen right now. These IoT devices, not only are you on a hostile network, you're also on a hostile network where there's multiple IoT devices connected to that same network where you're doing your day-to-day activities, where you're accessing sensitive content and trying to do your job in these COVID times, as I said. So those are all potential, you know, attack vectors that are sitting right next to you inside your home, inside your living room where you're sleeping sometimes. And those are incredibly sensitive things we need to think about when we consider, opening up the work from home type scenarios. The next piece of that is protecting that data, right? How am I protecting data with the content firewall while my end users are actually working from home? Everything is encrypted at rest and in transit with AES 256 encryption. And we also have TLS controls available for email transmissions that move in and out of the content firewall as well. What you see here on the left is something we call the security gauntlet. So every single file, no matter what the size is, no matter where it's going, where it's coming from, is going through what we call the security gauntlet. And that entails things like antivirus, which is scanning for viruses and malware. If you have a DLP system, that can be configured and attached as well. If you have ATP, our partners in that space are Checkpoint and FireEye. The ability to hook up an advanced threat protection to the product is also possible. HSM for any sort of key storage for the encryption keys of the platform, which again, you own, it's entirely yours. We offer integrations with that. And then last but not least, the SIM tool for syslogging. We're forwarding all the information from the internal system of the content firewall to whatever SIM tool of your choice. So you're able to get more information, more analytics, more reporting based on those activities as they're being generated within the content firewall. From an identity access management perspective, MFA for all types of accesses, and this is important, internal and external. Kiteworks and the enterprise content firewall supports MFA for every type of user, no matter where they're actually coming from or where they're going from, whether they're considered quote unquote internal or external. And you combine the MFA with things like LDAP or SSO from the inside folks, and you have a number of different layers that you can configure for access to the appliance as well. And that kind of falls in line with the zero trust model that it really forms the basis of the content firewall. The ability to minimize downloads for users from their access perspective is concerned. You as an admin of the system have the ability to pick and choose who can access what content at what time and how they access that content. An incredibly granular security structure that allows you to go through the system, configure it, and apply those configurations and those settings to every user that meets those the requirements of that profile, and allows you to control everybody in the same and efficient and safe manner. So you're not worrying about, hey, does user A, are they like user B or like user C? You set one set of controls and restraints, and the system will then apply those constraints and controls to those users as they come in. And then the last piece of that is transfer enterprise files directly to third party. So everything I've been talking about to this point is being able to share that information, applying all those items I just described, the MFA access, the security gauntlet scanning, the encryption at rest and in transit, all that's being applied to those enterprise files as they're going outside to third parties. And then last but not least on this page here, protecting all remote communication channels. As I said earlier, SFTP, MFT, web forms, logging in through the web, API transmissions, all those things are being secured and they're housed under one roof. We're able to protect all those remote communications as they're leaving the content firewall. And we can apply the content firewall and its security to those types of environments that maybe don't exist within Kiteworks or the content firewall initially, but you're able to expand or extend the security to those outside forms of transfer. Okay, moving on to requirement number 2. Accessing this remote content securely. By no means is this a webinar about trying to get rid of a VPN in any capacity. I'm sitting on a VPN right now. Accellion as a company uses a VPN for all of our employees to access incredibly sensitive and important tools that live in the internal networks. And we're not saying get rid of your VPN. If anything, a VPN is another layer that can be used in addition with the content firewall to show that you're taking security to the highest level. But what we look at a VPN is we look at a VPN as an access point. Whereas the content firewall is not only an access point, but it's also a mechanism to share that content. It does both. So it provides access to legacy data that's already on premise for these customers to do their job. As I mentioned earlier, things like, from the cloud perspective, Box, Dropbox, OneDrive, but also things that live on premise that are inside your internal network. Things like, those Go Anywhere drives, the SIF shares that I described earlier, SharePoint on-prem. These are all content repositories and content management systems that live inside your network. And you have the ability to provide access, not only provide access, but then also the ability to share that content. So like I said, 2 for 1, more bang for your buck in that respect. I touched on this a little bit, being able to access those on-prem resources, even without a VPN, seamless access through the content firewall, which can be done also, like I said, on your mobile device or on the computer as you're sitting here at home. and provides more governance and more history around those transactions. Again, the VPN is really showing you an access point and allowing for access from A to B. And it's obviously an encrypted tunnel that gives you secure access, but we go a little bit further as far as the governance that we're applying from a HIPAA and GDPR perspective, the NIST 800 capabilities that are built into the framework of the appliance, and we get more in depth as far as the logging and the history is concerned. And then at the bottom there, content firewall governs and secures all access. Like I said earlier on the slide before this, every single piece of content and every single user goes through the same security posture and the same security parameters that you enact as an organization as they touch the content firewall. Nothing is treated any differently. You're applying these policies across the board, and everything that comes through is not discriminated against, right? Everything is treated the same way, no matter the size, no matter the location, no matter where it's going, no matter the type. We take any kinds of data, all types of data, and we secure it and we move it in the same manner across the board. And then last but not least, really kind of putting a bow on everything here is making all the content activity visible, right? Everything that's happening within the system needs to be tracked and audited. It's one thing to apply compliance, but if there's no record or there's no history, there's no actual proof that you've done that, then what's the point of you having the compliance in the first place? So really getting down to it, knowing the who, what, where, when, and how of every single transfer. Again, doesn't matter where it's going, what it was done by, or who it was done by. We're giving you all that information across the board for every single transaction. Every single activity and action on the system is being logged. Uploads, downloads, transfers, permission changes, invitations. If somebody goes in and extends a file expiration from 30 to 31 days, you're going to get a notice. That's going to get logged. You can get an activity notice on that. You can report on that. If somebody removes a specific user or gives themselves admin credentials on another account they're not supposed to have, that is all logged and tracked within the syslog of the system. And at the end of the day, you're forwarding that to the SIM tool of your choice, and it's also being reported on our CISO dashboard that I described earlier, which I'll show you here in just a second. So it's really, really, really important for us to provide this type of in-depth reporting, in the system itself, because not everybody has the ability to have a SIM tool or has a NOC and a SOC that are set up to really go through with a fine-tooth comb, as I said earlier, and find that needle in the haystack. So as a platform, as a content firewall, it has a lot of the capabilities that you might see in a SIM tool already in place, but forwarding it off to your SIM tool really makes things more cohesive in that respect. And we certainly welcome those integrations because we feel it makes our clients' security posture even stronger. And then lastly, they're providing a complete audit trail, trusting the audit logs and the reporting. We've gone through, again, the rigors of making sure that our syslog is up to date, is easy to digest, and provides the requisite information that you really need to make a firm decision on how information was moved and processed and transferred across the organization. So I think that might be one more slide here on the security analytics. Again, this is really showing you what the CISO dashboard, I'm going to show you that here in just a second, is really all about, right? The ability to give you user anomalies, domain anomalies, traffic anomalies, location anomalies, failed login attempts across the entire globe, no matter where your content is being accessed from. Nobody wants to sit there and pour through lines and lines of reports, thousands of lines and Excel spreadsheets, and you're making your eyes bleed. How about an easily digestible picture, we're painting a picture for you so that you can digest that information in a quick and efficient manner without having to go through, like I said, with the fine-tooth comb. You can pull up exactly what you're looking for and you get a picture of it right in front of you. Being able to visualize and show what those access points are looking like and what those activities are actually being displayed as. So I'm going to stop sharing right there from a slide perspective. And I'm actually going to go ahead and share out my test environment here. We'll give that a second to load here. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at Accellion's pre-sales demo environment, right? So I use this system every day when I'm talking to prospective clients to show them what the content firewall is all about and the things that it provides. And in the last 30 days, again, this is a demo system with no value on it whatsoever. It's just got fake files and folders. I just use it to demonstrate its capabilities. In the last 30 days, this system alone has had almost 66,000 failed login attempts in 30 days for something that has absolutely no value to anybody outside of our organization from a financial perspective, right? This is, again, if this blew up today from a server perspective, I could just redeploy it and have it running again tomorrow. But now imagine if you're an actual enterprise organization, right? Imagine you're a large bank. Imagine if you're a large retail Imagine if you're a government organization. As soon as you put something on the internet, as I'm sure a lot of the people on the call are aware, you open yourself up to the types of scans, the types of attacks that we're seeing here on this page. And we all know, looking at the map here, we all know why this activity is happening in those specific regions. We obviously know what's going on in China here. We know what's going on in Russia and Eastern Europe. We know what's happening in Washington, D.C. and the Eastern Seaboard. And I'm seeing a lot more activity down here in Brazil and South America as of late. These are all malicious actors trying to gain access to the system. And if I click in on a specific dot here, I don't think I can even find Shanghai in here. Well, actually, well, first try. Almost 600 failed attempts from Shanghai alone, with people just trying to guess the credentials of the product, right? Look at this: Stream, Odo, Press, PDX, File Server Test. People just trying to slam into the system through a number of different ways, but they'll never get access. And we have a number of security controls in place to prevent those types of, overload attacks, if you will. People just trying to brute force the system. We have security controls in place that allow for the blacklisting of IPs after a certain number of attempts in a short amount of time. And there's a number of different ways to kind of protect the system from that perspective. But how about we switch it to the good guys? People we know have valid accounts, information was shared with them, and how that content was actually shared across the world. And we have servers in Singapore, we have servers in Australia, Western Europe, Eastern Seaboard and the Western Seaboard from the United States perspective. And all across the world, we see this information being moved. Every single line you're seeing there is an actual data transaction. So if I click on one of these lines here, talking about really drilling down and giving you the governance that you guys are looking for here. Date and time, user, the type of client that was used to access the system. In this case, it was our actual Salesforce plugin. The name of the file, the size of the file, and going back to those GDPR constraints I mentioned earlier, the actual server IP of where it landed in the cluster. I can prove that that piece of information is living within that specific server based on the IP address of where it landed, and I know exactly where that information actually originated from an IP address perspective as well. And as well as the full path. Sometimes the full path is really important as well, because you need to know actually where it's landed within the server so you know who actually has access to that. If I know that, John Smith and Jerry Johnson both have access to that folder, I know who actually has access to the content by virtue of knowing where it actually landed in the system itself. And it's no different from an upload perspective, right? If I click on one of these red lines, or excuse me, this is a download versus an upload, I know that on this date and time, this user with this device downloaded this file of this size, and again, IP address and server IP of where the actual transmission happened. So this is incredibly important when your security professionals need to really find out what's happening to my information, because now I've got every successful login, I've got every upload and download over the last 30 days. But now I want to go down a little bit further. Maybe I want to know every single transmission that happened on an iPhone in the last 30 days. I'm able to really drill down into all those transactions and see that, hey, oh, this was me. I actually downloaded a file from the West Coast to Australia on this date and time with this username, with this device, with my iPhone. This is the name of that file. This is the size. And again, IP address showing me where that information came from and where it actually landed in the cluster. So the ability to really drill down, not only on the client type, maybe I want to drill down on the specific region. Like, why am I even doing business in Australia? We have no contacts in Australia. We have no business in Singapore. Why are people moving data there? Maybe there's a project you weren't aware of, or maybe there is actually something going on that is malicious in nature, and you need to figure out and get to the bottom of what's actually happening. But this page allows for you to really drill down, and also maybe drill down by email. Like, we never allow the transmission of information to a Gmail account. I want to see if anybody's actually done that in the last 30 days. They know that this is not an allowed policy. They know that they're not supposed to do that. And now I can prove that these specific users actually did that, and this is the types of files that they moved. So this right here is, a lot of people in the call are listening in about how they can maybe protect their IP, their crown jewel. I would say that this is Accellion's crown jewel, the ability to quickly and easily translate that syslog data into something that is digestible for any user that has access to this page, right? You don't have to be somebody that's really experienced in a NOC and a SOC to really be able to find out what's happening to information as it's being moved through the content firewall. This page really empowers those, other side of the coin administrators, if you will, right? People that maybe aren't the most technical in nature, but they can still get visibility, they can still get information, they can still find out and paint that picture where that information is being used and how it's being used across the board. And then last but not least, the HIPAA and the GDPR stuff that I touched on earlier, out-of-the-box compliance. We have the ability to prove and show through our GDPR and HIPAA reporting that transactions on this system and on this service were actually done in an above-board manner. Things like, how long the terms of use have been enabled for, how long profiles are alive for, and what's the occurrence as far as checking, how many times they've accepted the TOS. Things like if I have SSO integration or LDAP integration, maybe I want to know when the encryption keys were last rotated. All this information is presentable from an auditable perspective to those agencies so that you guys know that everything you're doing on the system is done in the right manner and in the right way. And you can present that if an auditor comes knocking, as I'm sure they have done and will do in the future. So I'm gonna stop there. I think that's a really good place to kind of pause and tie things off as far as the presentation is concerned. Again, this is something that at the end of the day, I really want to leave you guys with. The Content Firewall allows for you to give visibility, control, access, security, encryption, and governance to these types of transmissions as they move. And at the end of the day, it is yours and yours alone. This is a private deployment. It's not multi-tenant in the cloud. It's a private deployment. It is yours. You own the data, you own the metadata, and you own the encryption keys. And those are incredibly important facets for us to follow and live by, because we think that's going to make us a successful company and has made us a successful company, and will really help the Content Firewall really go to the next step. And like I said, I'll stop there. I think Samantha, now is time for some Q&A.
Yes, thank you, Charles. We did get a couple questions. So the first question is, can you use workflows for export approval?
Workflows for export approval. There isn't anything specifically in the appliance that has any sort of trigger or mechanism around actual approval, but you are able to pass. I have a customer recently that showed me their setup there. It's really incredible. They actually built through our custom API portal, they built, if you will, like a checkout shop, I'll call it, where they're able actually to drill into specific repositories that live in their enterprise and push that content through a workflow approval process like you're describing, and then use Accellion and Kiteworks as the processor to move that information. So we're not necessarily involved in the actual approval process. They built that on their own accord, but before everything can be sent through Kiteworks and through the Content Firewall, it has to go through the approval process that you're describing. So while I wouldn't say that we do it directly ourselves, our API, our REST API suite gives us the ability to interact with and integrate with a process that you're describing there. And I've actually seen it in real time, and I've seen it happen in front of my eyes talking to a customer. So I think the answer would be yes.
Okay, great, thank you. And then another question, do you have environments that are for US persons only?
Great question. So the FedRAMP piece is definitely right in the wheelhouse of that kind of question. The controls around that allow for only people approved to be accessing that content and only have access to that content. So even myself, I used to actually be a support agent here for Accellion, and I had to go through a background check. I had to go through an approval process to be able to work on a FedRAMP approved system as a US citizen. So the controls and constraints that we apply from that perspective, as far as who is able to access that data, all comes down the line from the FedRAMP requirements that are put in place, and we adhere to and follow those requirements so that we can maintain our approval, and obviously to maintain the requirements around our customers' data, which we take incredibly seriously. So yes, the FedRAMP environment allows for you to customize and control from a US personnel perspective who has access to that information.
Okay, and then the last question is, will it work in Azure High Cloud?
Absolutely. Yeah, the Kiteworks Enterprise Content Firewall application is available for download from the Azure Marketplace, and putting that into any one of your Azure tenants is entirely possible and absolutely supported. And Azure, is climbing. It's climbing a lot. I think a lot of that has to do with the Office 365 push that Microsoft has been making over the last couple of years. I'm sure everyone on the phone knows about that and has maybe even felt the weight of Microsoft putting that on them. And we're no different, right? We're seeing Azure climb up the ranks, if you will. AWS obviously still has a very large piece of the market share, something north of 95%, I think. But everyone is coming; they're getting closer and closer, and we welcome more opportunities to integrate with tools such as that. But Azure definitely is something we support.
Awesome, great, thank you, Charles. That's it for questions. So I'll go ahead and just close out the meeting on behalf of Aurora. Thank you everyone for joining. We'll be sending out a recording of the webinar for your reference. And if you have any additional questions or you want to learn more, you could reach out to Charles, who presented today, or Larry and Mike from the Aurora team. So you can go ahead and email me at marketing@aurorait.com, and I'll connect you to the team. So thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.